I want to ask you, Chibits, a quick question. If you were in the exact same position as the king in this episode of Arslan, to where your army is known worldwide to be one of the strongest on planes, and you have the strong army, you know the area, you know the stuff that's going around in this little bit of the land, would you continue to charge into that fight, especially when there is fog? I'm curious about all of your Chibits viewpoints. I mean, don't just agree and say like, oh no, you wouldn't charge into the fog. I mean, really, would you have continued into that fog if you were in the king's position? I'm just curious. I'm curious how many Chibits, what they would have chose if they were in the exact same situation, because here's the only issue I really had with this episode. Not the episode, I'm just talking about what the king's decision was. And makes me just really upset. If you're a king and you're in a position of power, you have a lot of rule, you need to listen to your advisors. That's one thing you really need to do when you're in that situation, because if you're a king that thinks you should control everything and not have anybody, you know, giving you a word of mouth on the side, for instance, you know, like an advisor helping you out, you're gonna get fucked. And one of the main characters in this episode tried to give a word of warning and advise the king, but the king just pretty much bitch slapped him. Bitch slapped him, was like, I don't want your fucking advice, and just kicked him to the side. And that right there, when I saw that scene, I knew this king was a failure, because it wasn't the point that this was an obvious trap. It wasn't an obvious trap. Like, I mean, even if it wasn't an obvious trap, okay? Let's just cast that aside. Let's say this wasn't a trap and it was an obvious trap. I still think the king is a failure of a king to not take advice from his advisors or people that are close to him, because if you don't take advice, you're going to get fucked eventually. And let alone, this dude has been very valiant, and he's cared for the king and the royal family for a long time, as we could tell from the last episode. And to see how he was treated like this when he was giving an honest-to-God warning, that king is a failure, because you don't do that to someone that cares about you and is giving you good advice. Even if you don't want to retreat, you don't have to treat the man like that. You don't. So, yeah, the job of the king is to hear advice from your fellow subordinates, your fellow advisors, and yeah. Obviously, we can already see a difference between Arslan, our main male character, and the king that is, you know, reigning over the entire kingdom in this episode and last episode, because our main character, he is more compassionate and understanding, and he's willing to talk with his advisors, so clearly he's going to be a better king. It's very obvious, because after seeing what his father is doing in this episode, he's going to die. It's so obvious. You're going to lead to your own death when you do stuff like that to your own men. And let alone right before the battlefield. Like, right before the battlefield when everything is uncertain to begin with. Yeah, the dude asked for it. He fucking asked for it. Like, how is this dude even alive? Like, if he doesn't take advice from his advisors, how is this dude still alive? How? I'm guessing he got lucky. I'm really thinking that, because that's the only way he could have survived all these countless battles, is if he was lucky. And, yeah, everything was just on his side when it came to the weather and stuff like that. So that's the point I wanted to point out when it came to this episode. Just the king, a failure. He's straight up a failure. Yes, he is good at war and things like that, fine. But the point still stands. You need to listen to your advisors. So, getting into other points of this episode, that's kind of what it was, like what I was discussing. You know, the decisions of a king that affect everybody. Now, the episode, it had some really good pacing. Like, the majority of this episode is just seeing our characters on the war front about to go into a war and getting to see what is going to happen. Like, we get a demonstration of what war is really like, and our main male character gets a demonstration of what war is like. And so after this battle, we're going to assume this is going to change his outlook on wars in, you know, being a king. Like, this is going to build him up as a king and what he should do as a king. I mean, obviously, you need to have trusted advisors, especially with what happened to the king in, you know, this episode. One of his commanders betrayed him and fucked him over, and that probably led to the decisions the kings made over courses of battlefields after battlefields, because if you slap your main trustworthy advisors to the side like you did in this episode, you're eventually going to get advisors that will stab a knife into your back, like what happened in this episode. So the king kind of eventually built that up and asked for it. Now, the episode of Arslan, very hype. It was a very, very, very fucking hype episode. Like, oh my god, the music and soundtrack, that opening too. Yo, like, what is with anime this season with brilliant openings and ending songs? Like, my god, the opening and ending songs of the series is just fucking good, and so a lot of other series are too. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to next week's episode. I really am. This is going to be a good ride. I can already tell you, it's going to definitely be a good ride. I just hope that our king learns from his father's mistakes and doesn't decide to backhand his fellow advisors that give him advice. So tell me your thoughts. You all have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. Please be safe. Chibi out.